Okay, 100. Here we go. Well, welcome everyone. So firstly, David, Sarah, and Lisa, and everyone else. We've got people in the US, in the UK, in New Zealand, in Malaysia. So whatever time it is, welcome. I'm Chris. I'm the CEO of Bodyswaps, and I will be your host today. The response to this webinar has been absolutely phenomenal. It's by far the most attended webinar we're going to have. And there's a chat. Please feel free to use it, introduce yourselves, ask questions. The secondary goal of today is to really create a community of practice. Obviously, business is business, so we have a message from our sponsor that we need to start with. And luckily, I am also the sponsor, so I'm going to do the message. This webinar is sponsored by Bodyswaps. In today's world, great human skills are the #1 predictor of success for your students. But teaching soft skills in the classroom settings is a little bit like learning to surf in a paddling pool. You can explain the theory, you can watch the videos, but until you're actually in the water, you're not really learning. Bodyswaps puts your students in the water with AI-powered immersive simulation, where they can practice real conversation, get real feedback, and build real confidence before the stakes are real. Bodyswaps is the world's leading solution for soft skills training in higher education, where over 100,000 students have built their confidence. And yes, it also works on a laptop, not just on a headset. Head to bodyswaps.co, that's bodyswaps.co. Terms and conditions apply. All right, this is it. Let's go back to the normal background and to the webinar. So when Shireen from our marketing team came to me a few weeks ago and said that I was going to moderate a panel on misogyny, I tried to get out of it because I feel that it wasn't my place. I'm not a researcher. I'm not an educator. I'm not a woman. I'm not a parent, and I'm certainly not a teenager. Even worse, I'm the CEO of a soft skills training company, and I'm pretty clueless. I also know that there's some interesting noises in the background. I also know that the parents are lost. The governments are pretty clueless. The kids are zombified and the victims rather than the perpetrators. And that kind of puts a lot of pressure on education and educators. And then I thought, well, maybe some educators also feel powerless and clueless and just like me. And the fact that there's almost 150 of you here today shows that this is what we're here to talk about. So how I came to the topic is pretty mainstream. So I watched the show Adolescence with Stephen Graham. If you haven't seen it, you have to. It's top 3 best series ever put to screen. And if you haven't seen it, you need to just like cut the sound off your computer for the next 30 seconds. If you have seen it and you have not cried, you need to get yourself checked because you might be dead already. When you watch Adolescence, the thing that's devastating is it's a waste of lives in both sides. Obviously, the girl and her family, the victim, but also the kid and his family. And then so you can come back if you cut the sounds. A few months later, I watched the Manosphere documentary by Louis Theroux, and he was a little bit criticized by not being hard enough on the Manosphere influencer. I think actually what they did was much smarter. Is that when you look at the documentary, and I've been told that we lost the camera. There we go. So it's what Louis Theroux made obvious. Like it is a masquerade. It is young men exploiting a vacuum for business, and that vacuum is male teenage adolescents. And then I asked myself, truly, if I was a teenager in 2026, can I say that I wouldn't have fallen for it? I remember adolescence being a really shitty time. It's an existential crisis. It's a time where you're crying for belonging, crying for validation. There's a lot of self-loathing. There's a lot of alienation. It's quite horrible. And luckily enough, in 2001, when I was 16, I found The Strokes, the best rock band in the 21st century. This is not debatable. And that became my personality, right? I had the lead singer as a friend on MySpace, and their philosophy was skinny jeans, gym is lame, your hair should be greasy and long. So it wasn't toxic in the same way. But now in 2026, there's a perfect storm, right? So you had COVID, which for kids who are teenagers today was coming at a very crucial time. And then you have social media, and that has created an isolation at a key age. And the more isolation, the weaker the soft skills. And the weaker the soft skills, the greater the isolation. And you have this like vicious cycle. And then on top of that, misogyny and bullying got legitimized. Apparently, one can be found guilty of sexual abuse and become the leader of the free world twice, which is obviously a little bit of a problem. And so kids are struggling with soft skills. They live on their screen, and on their screen, which is a world that parents are excluded from, they get told by manosphere influencers that soft skills are for soft boys. And then you have the government. So the UK government just announced a 20 million package as part of the Violence Against Women and Girls campaign. 20 million package sounds like a lot until you realize that's less than £5 per pupil, which is, you get about half a pint for that price now in London. 20 million is what Andrew Tate makes in 3 months in his subscription platform. So we're kind of like fighting tanks with tweezers, which brings us to where we are today. We want to hear from people in the room, so Sarah, Lisa, and David, who are in with students every day, who have tried things, who have failed at things. Sometimes have found things that works, have a lot of questions more than answers, and have very different profiles. So we have represented US, Wales, England. We have a former counterterrorism officer. We have a former journalist. We have someone who's been teaching 3-year-olds to 19-year-olds for over 30 years. So a lot of different perspectives and approaches, and hopefully we can talk about things that are actually working. So let's start with the panelists introducing themselves. Sarah, Lisa, and David, just tell us in 1 minute who you are and where you come from.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and taking your time and energy to invest in this conversation with us. I'm Sarah Gallucci. I am an author, professor, speaker. I share the sentiment of feeling powerless, but actually I am actually more angry. I am actually really angry about the state of things. I'm angry about going to the classroom and the male students who make me feel like my heart is racing and that I have to call security. So I'm pissed, and I'm here because of that anger and because I have hope. I have optimism for men. I know quite a few good ones, present company included. And so I'm also really optimistic about artificial intelligence and the intersection of all of this. So thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Lisa Purcell. I'm Assistant Principal for Learner Experience in Coleg, which is a college in South Wales for learners. It's a further education college for learners 16 plus. I've been in education for a long time, for over 30 years, and I've been really interested in this topic. I've been part of collaborations, including a community of practice with colleges in Wales and those in Canada, looking at peer-on-peer abuse and specifically at misogyny. And I'm with Sarah. I'm like mostly angry, but also hopeful. We've got really good plans and we've got fantastic young people that we work with every day. So hopeful too.
Hi, I'm David Knowles, and thank you first for the invitation to speak at this really important event. It's such an important discussion to have. I was a police officer for 30 years, and probably the best period of my career was the 10 years I spent in counter-terrorism, and I specialised in prevent. That's preventing extremism, preventing terrorism, and one of my roles was as the national lead for preventing terrorism in schools, colleges, and universities. So pretty much the whole age group for education. And I had a key role in helping to write the prevent strategy, which, if you're in the UK and you're in education, you'll know about the prevent strategy. It's not the most loved bit of legislation, but it's also quite a crucial part of ensuring people don't become terrorists or extremists. And misogyny falls into that kind of shadowy area of extremist ideologies. Now, after leaving the police, I then became an educator. So I began teaching on the policing degree program. And then more recently, I've been using virtual reality to try and teach police officers how to use ethical decision-making related to police sexual misconduct, which I know we'll come on to talk about later on. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot. So first question really is let's look at the state of things and how things have changed or accelerated in the last 10 years or so. So can you tell us one by one, what does misogyny look like today in your classroom or your work, and what you feel has slid? Sarah.
In the classroom, in the best case scenario, you would have male students in the classroom totally disengaged. This is best case scenario, okay? They're on their phones, they're looking at their laptops, not doing the work, they're not engaging with fellow students during group work. They are feeling like they can't come to me to talk about whatever confusion they're having in the course, or perhaps something in their learning environment outside of academics that may be affecting their performance in the course. Worst case scenario is you have male students who are extremely aggressive, both in their language and their behavior, to the point where I alluded to earlier in my introduction, where I am put on edge pretty much on the regular. And as we've discussed, it is a situation where it gets called classroom management, where I have to go in and manage the classroom and possibly redirect. But in fact, it's miscategorized, it's violence. And so that's what it looks like from my end. And the worst case would be, having to get security involved. And as we know in the United States, guns in schools is a really big issue. And so I'm constantly vying for my safety and the safety of the others in the classroom.
So that's I remember that's something you told me, Sarah, about the fact that in the case of the US, the because of the gun situation, the physical safety unfortunately has to come before the upstander intervention actually challenging people. But Lisa, when we chatted, you told me that there's maybe a more pernicious problem, which has to do with not having the full picture institutionally, because there's a problem of categorization and confidence. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what Sarah's talking about there, I've heard people in secondary schools, female teachers, telling us this. I've not heard it reported in our college, and doesn't seem to be reported across colleges in Wales when I've worked with colleagues across Wales. In terms of what it looks like in the last 10 years, I do believe it's there underground, but there's not that much out and about. There's more conversation now, since adolescence particularly. There's more conversation. Our inspectorate did a report on peer-on-peer abuse and sexual harassment in schools and colleges, and that started conversation. So people are talking about it more, and there's training out there for staff and for our learners. But I am sure that it is hugely underreported. So I think where misogyny has always been around, and I'm sure always was, that's what's behind the algorithms that are pushing the hate and everything now. It's always been there, but obviously it's accelerated through the social media use. But I think it's so commonplace that people aren't reporting it for one reason or another. So yeah, it's difficult really to say exactly where we are. I've personally heard of 2 instances in the last few months, but they were both reported as classroom misconduct concerns. And when I did some digging, I accidentally found out that there was quite serious misogynistic activity that was the cause of that, but that wasn't reported as misogyny. And so it wasn't managed in that way either. So that's the problem that we're facing.
And I guess the natural question after that is why do you feel that those kinds of behavior are not reported as misogyny? Is it self-censoring from the educators who maybe haven't been trained enough, or is it also like a top-down desire to cover things up?
I think you only have to look at there was a recent legal case in the UK where teenage boys were not convicted of a crime, even though they'd raped two different girls and recorded it and shared the video of that rape, and they weren't convicted of a crime, although that's being reviewed. And I think that just shows you that misogyny it's inherent in all our systems, throughout education and other systems. So I think that's part of it. I think probably for our female members of staff, I think they're so used to it happening. I think part of it is they don't report it because they don't see it as, not that they don't see it as a problem, just because it happens so much, it's not reported. And I think for our young people, there's a view that they're used to it, that that's just life, and so you don't report it. But also when we've done focus groups, our learners and other colleges in Wales, there are young people who believe that they either don't want to report it because they want things to be worse for them. They don't want it to be escalated because of the extreme violence that they are subjected to, like in text, that they're worried is going to turn into real violence, or they don't report it because they think nothing's going to happen anyway. And when you think of that recent legal case, you can see why young people think that what's the point in reporting, because those girls reported that, and as a society we've done nothing. So I think that's probably it.
Great. And David, I wanted to come to you now on so obviously looking more at the police now versus, at the beginning of your career, what have you seen changed or tolerated, and what do you see as an explanation?
Well, I mean, the police across the globe is a patriarchal organization. It's been dominated by men for centuries, and it still is, albeit certainly in Western countries, we're seeing a more gradual move to the 50-50 equality in terms of male-female numbers. And I can see some pushback from the kind of alpha males, if you like, who don't necessarily want women to have equality in the police workplace. But also we're seeing an awful lot of police sexual misconduct being reported. In the UK, there's been some horrific cases, probably the worst of which was the murder of Sarah Everard. I think that was 2020. It was certainly during the COVID period, because she was abducted, raped and murdered by a Sterling police officer from the Metropolitan Police. He was convicted. Obviously, the tragedy happened, and we had some other cases, not quite as serious, if it didn't involve murder, but we've had a number of cases involving rape by serving police officers. In fact, not a week goes by without more allegations of sexual misconduct of a fairly serious nature by male police officers. So in line with that, we've seen this kind of global shift to the right in the last 10, 15 years. The Brexit situation with the UK and Europe, Trump coming to power in the States and other countries. It's not just those two countries. And with that kind of right-wing shift comes the misogynistic views, the traditional values, as it might be called. They're not traditional, they're hateful and misogynistic. So policing is a reflection of society. And so you see we're going to get more and more men at the moment who are coming to the fore as thinking it's okay to treat women in this appalling way.
So that's a very, very bleak picture, but I guess everyone here agrees. I think to spend maybe 5 more minutes on the different facets of the phenomenon before we move into what we can do. So what you're pointing at is almost like there's a top down and a top down and bottom up. So from a top down, there's the modeling of behaviors in governments, goes down to the police and the patriarchal organization, and then from the bottom up, there is maybe the desensitization, lack of training, and maybe a lack of faith in the system to be able to do anything. And so the top-down movement like reinforces the bottom-up problem. There is something, Sarah, that you mentioned when we discussed, which had to do with the way institutions were encouraged to treat issues in the college coming from students. Do you wanna expand on what you told me the other day?
Sure. There has been a shift in my community college here, Central Piedmont Community College in Charlotte, North Carolina, is not an isolated situation with institutions moving to a more like customer service model. So we want to make our students as happy as possible, make them repeat customers. This is obviously probably a response to dwindling enrollment numbers. And so we've had encouragement from leadership to really maybe extend some deadlines, soften our language, and other ways that you would think of running a hospitality service rather than an educational institution that would be normally a place to apply necessary friction to processes and apply, like in my case, teaching English, necessary friction to a writing process. There's very much part of it. Friction is in relational dynamics. And so educational institutions are supposed to be the space where you get students a little uncomfortable because failings and rejections are where they learn. But we're being very much encouraged to almost have these like kid gloves on and make it like we're at a 5-star restaurant.
So that echoes something that I've been told by a senior educator in the US who told me that they could not be confrontational in any way with the students, and therefore they could not simulate work interactions that they would have that might be difficult, like getting feedback and things like that. And I remember that she wanted to use Bodyswaps as what you call an a-hole simulator, right? To simulate the these kinds of people that you will see in the real world. And to tie to this, I was reading a testimonial from a UK educator who said that she had caught, I think it was in secondary school, she had caught a teenager like laughing and sharing a masculinist video in the school, and she was confronted with either tell that student off and say, this has no place at school. You need to like give your phone. But instead, she said, if you forbid something, that's going to draw the teenagers, right? So they're going to do what they're going to do. They're going to see what they're going to see. So instead, her advice was to actually take whatever they are watching and show it on the big screen in the classroom. It's quite radical. What are the pros and cons of having an approach like that, bringing it out in the open and trying to speak about it?
It reminded me of the village. You call out behavior in the village and then you call in, okay? An example of that is down the street from my house, there is a coffee shop owned by a Black woman, and we were in there all together, and some kids skipped school. So you know what she did? She went out there, she had a little chat with them. She's my age, so we're in our 40s, so there's a big gap. And then what happened from there is then she pulled another man that was in the coffee shop who was kind of in between our ages to go talk to them as well, to say, hey, you're skipping school. Do you know what can happen in that case? There's possible incarceration risk, there's drug use risk, and called out all the things. Then all of a sudden an elder walks in, and then we have the elder come in and kind of do a quick little teaching moment in an intimate space. There's only like maybe 5 or 6 of them. So it was this moment that we could model for the classrooms. You could have these teachable moments in intimate spaces similar to the village, and you have it intergenerational. And we know that people in intimate kind of group settings, they are more honest with each other. They're more vulnerable and more willing to kind of share. And so, yes, teaching out in open, that would be great. But like empowering people in smaller intimate groups similar to the village is really effective.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, Sarah, and say that you are a TEDx speaker, you are a former journalist, so you might be well equipped to confront and be at ease in those chats. But maybe Lisa and David, like if you or teachers at your institutions had to suddenly run something like this, I mean, David, you run Prevent, and Lisa, you deal with a lot of teachers in FE. Like, can this backfire?
Yeah. You gotta have the confidence to do it, and I know that a lot of teaching staff are feeling really unconfident in this area at the minute. So yeah, you've gotta have the confidence to do that well, because that could really backfire. And one thing I always think is if it was particularly like misogynistic content, I would worry about the harm we are potentially doing by sharing that content. Because each time even if we're desensitized and we're used to it, somewhere it still has the capacity to cause harm. And then would we be unintentionally causing more harm to people there? So I guess, yeah, I can see how it's really powerful, but it's got to be the right person doing that at the right time who knows those learners really well.
Okay, and David, do you have a view on the question?
Yeah, I think creating debate is one of the most important parts of adult learning, particularly at universities. It's creating debate, it's hearing other people's views, having the wisdom and the maturity to listen to people's views, and then actually think, do you know what, maybe I'll amend my views. That's a very mature way of learning. It may not apply to younger people, younger students. So you have to have that expectation of maturity, but also someone who's strong enough and confident enough to take that argument to them. So I'm agreeing with both Sarah and Lisa. I think it needs to be the right moment and the right person to do that.
And we definitely, one of the things we've got to work on is how we allow our young people to talk about this, that it's safe for them to talk about. Because we've got to give them the opportunity to say these things and for them not to feel like we're judging them, so that they can talk about what they're seeing and what they're experiencing in a way that is safe for them to do that. So we've got to allow the discussions to be held somehow. And I think what Sarah was saying is you do that in smaller, well organized sort of groups, to make sure everybody is feeling safe.
That sounds good. There's a lot of debate going on in the chat. And before we move on to the next question, I want to do an extremely unscientific survey and ask the question to the audience. If you think bringing the debate as much as possible in the classroom is a good idea, you can vote with a thumbs up. If you think it's too dangerous right now, you can vote with a thumbs down. And if you're really not sure, you can vote with that wondering face. So I'll give you a few seconds to vote and get a feel for whether educators are more keen to chat or not. There's a lot of thumbs up, a couple of wondering faces. So repeating the question, if you think doing debates in classes, bringing the content in classes is good, thumbs up. If you think it's a dangerous idea, thumbs down. If you're not sure, that's strange wondering face. Okay. Moving on from that, so this UK government package says black on white, every secondary institution should have a strong offer to teach students about healthy relationships. So I think the words are quite interesting. Teach about healthy relationships. What would be, if you were, and there's no more details, by the way. So if you were the ones designing that strong offer, what would be some of the principles you would bring in? I'm putting you on the spot as if you're a part of the government. Maybe I go with David first, because David, you have a bit of experience doing similar things.
Well, I think I've got three prongs to my approach, actually. And the first thing I would do, and this shows you as being an ex-neighborhood police officer, I would put a neighborhood police officer in every college and, if I could, into every secondary school, not to be an enforcer, but to be a safeguarder, to be someone there, to be a role model, to create that debate, and also to make those referrals of anybody who was in need of any safeguarding. But that officer would also help develop a curriculum with the educators to ensure that things like critical thinking, debates about topical subjects, because let's face it, pretty much every day there's a topical subject in the news. And where do young people get their news from? It's from Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. It's not from mainstream media, perhaps like what we may have grown up using. To have that officer helps develop those debates and discussions and make sure their guidance around key topics is a strong one rather than one that's guided by their peers. And thirdly, I would get the officer to work with the staff to develop training for both students and the staff. And I would use virtual reality for that. I'm really into experiential learning. And of course, VR, I'm using it really well to teach police officers. It's a really good modern way of using technology and gamification to teach really important skills.
I think the VR point is interesting for engagement, but there's two things you hinted at, David, that I would love to get Sarah and Liz's opinion on. One is the modeling, and the other one is the medium. So on the medium, you said, maybe you read The Guardian. Certainly, those kids don't read The Guardian. And then on the modeling, your tutorial teacher who might teach, anti-misogyny lessons as part of the tutorial program may not be as aspirational from a monetary success perspective as the Andrew Tates of this world, and it's a little bit of an unfair fight. So that's my question to Sarah and Lisa. Who is the model? How do we bring them in, and on what medium? I know you've both done something, so
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think we're starting to use VR, and that has been really powerful as a way of supporting young people to experience things safely. So we are using Bodyswaps that for a tackling misogyny module that we're doing. I think critical thinking is absolutely essential. I think if there's one thing we're going to be teaching our young people at the minute, it's critical thinking. And then I think rather than lessons on healthy relationships, I think we need to be developing a sense of belonging in our education setting, so people feel that they belong, and also giving young people opportunities to make connections. So instead of looking online to make connections, they're making real connections, and by making connections with their peers and with their staff, then I think that's the way we tackle this. I think that's our starting point, rather than a lesson on this is a healthy relationship. But we do that as well. As well as the VR headsets. I know Deek has been commenting in the chat. He's our wonderful tackling misogyny guy in the college, and he does group sessions, and he does lots of discussions about this as well, and talks about the manosphere and the man box and all that. And so all of those sessions are important as well. And he does healthy relationships. He's found a way of gaming, like a card game for, finding all sorts of different ways to get the message across. But I think you've got to get the belonging bit first, and you've got to get those connections, people making real connections for it to have impact.
Yeah, and to echo, I agree with everything that both David and Lisa have said. In my classrooms, and I would love VR in my classroom. So if anybody is here from Central Piedmont Community College, I'll be emailing you to ask you if we can get some of that. But also for the human approach as well, in my classrooms, my students don't know that I'm modeling because I don't tell them, because if I tell them that I'm doing it, they're going to automatically tune out and think it's cheesy and corny, and they don't want to listen. So what I do is I have them get in reciprocity circles, it's called, in the class pretty often. And so they get in circles and they have to talk about the work that's due that week. It's very low stakes. I give them a questionnaire to kind of help them out, like who's your reporter for the group? They're going to take the notes, who's asking the questions, who's providing the help. So I'm not saying that they're doing it for social and emotional reasons, but they are. And their goal at the end of every single session is to come away with at least one contact person that they can use in case I'm not available for their questions. So we're already building connections in that way, rather than shoving it down the throat, similar to we talked about anti-drug, anti-drug campaigns that just literally don't work, unfortunately. But also I was going to say, building community in ways. I grew up in the 90s where I was in the open mic kind of underground scene, where you went to open mic poetry and slam poetry. And I'm telling you, every lesson you needed to learn about life was in those dingy places where people are shouting their poems and rapping their poems. You learned a lot about relational skills and life and connection, and you weren't getting it shoved down your throat. It was by osmosis. And so I sometimes, we have these talks with the dean of my department. We need to do more community events where we bring in creatives through music, through art, through poetry, and teach these lessons without actually teaching them, and also bring in food, make it enjoyable, make it truly community college.
There's a couple of things you said. So one, starting with Lisa, was the recreating a feeling of belonging in the real world, not in the digital world, because belonging is what young people are are after. And then Sarah, I think you topped that up by saying, the more you engage, the more you belong. And to get a feeling of engagement and belonging, it can be done in an indirect way. You might not have to tackle the topic head on, but just create connections between people that create that implicit empathy. Moving on, there's something we discussed, Lisa, about how you can work with your students to spread the word further. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing there?
Yeah, so we asked a couple of male learners to start us off, and asked them to go out and spread the word and try and get a little gang together who could be ambassadors for us. And they came back with a plan for how they thought for a social media campaign. So we've launched a campaign called Flag It, which is because we think this area is underreported. So there's posters and pop-ups and digital screens that say this is not okay, report it. And they came up with their idea for how we could link that with a social media campaign. So they've done that. And we've got another group of young people. We're going for white ribbon accreditation. Well, we have white ribbon accreditation in the college. And part of that is our learner ambassadors. So we've invited our learners to come along so that they are part of the solution. They know an awful lot more about how we can connect and what 16 and 17-year-olds want than I do.
And on the idea of ambassadors and modeling, which is there's modeling that happens online and there's modeling that happens on the political spectrum, and we need to counter that. And I think you all have mentioned different kinds of model. I was reading this brilliant article online about in Hackney, they did a screening of the Manosphere documentary to students in Hackney, and then they interviewed them and interviewed specifically the students that were not interested in it, that grew out of it, so to speak. And there was this one teenager who said, like, I grew out of it because my older brother, saw me watch this and made fun of me, called me a tool for falling into the trap. And that's quite interesting in terms of generational relatability. And I'm wondering if you've heard or triggered any initiative to try to connect your students with relatable figures outside of the institution that are still within the same world.
The only thing I've heard in the United States talked about this, because there are so many, so limited options for men to join groups and be in communion with each other and be in support with each other. There's Professor Scott Galloway, who has a podcast, well known. He often talks about Big Brothers, Big Sisters. It's a nonprofit organization here that we need more male mentors who are kind of at the age from 18 to maybe 30, really going into these organizations and being mentors, regular mentors for these young people.
That sounds great. And one last question. Oh,
sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead, Lisa.
I was just going to say that our aim is to for our male learners to be mentors, but not to deliver any particular package, but just to get out into secondary schools and make connections with because that's where the problem is. I think is worse, with that age. I think they're the more vulnerable children. So I would love our male learners to go out in schools and not go out with an agenda or a session to teach, but just to be a mentor, just to do something, make some sort of connections with them and just do something nice with them. But they are being a positive male role model at the same time. So that's our plan for the next academic year.
So great. So role modeling, very, very important to reconnect the young people. And then maybe before you move on to the lightning round, David, on your research back into let's say the institution, the uniformed forces, any sliver of hope from your research?
Yes, without a doubt, there's hope. And let me be clear, I'm not using Bodyswaps VR, by the way. No one's paying me to say this. I'm using VR with one particular police force in the south of England. and it's work that's supported by the College of Policing, which is the professional body covering all the forces in England and Wales. And what I've done, I've created some VR scenarios which show very clear misogyny, and the user, the headset user, is invited to intervene and to use appropriate language and behavior to try and stop that behavior continuing and getting worse. Not about noting it down and reporting it later, because that can be done, of course it can, but to get a cultural change, to stop this misogyny from spreading, to stop us having more sexual misconduct, we need to challenge that behavior and continue that working relationship. And unfortunately, there's within the police culture, and this is global, there's something called the Blue Code of Silence, where it's a kind of agreed cultural threshold where you do not report your colleagues or challenge your colleagues in the main. So this VR scenarios are doing that. They're encouraging people to challenge that behavior. And the great thing is the male officers are changing their attitude. I'm doing interviews, surveys, and VR observations with many officers across different age spectrums as well, different lengths of experience. And it's quite clear that male officers of all age groups are changing their attitude to challenging their colleagues' behavior, which is quite promising.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. So now it's almost 1:45. So what we're going to do, we're going to do a lightning round of questions. I have sent you the questions in advance. I hope you've prepared, because they are not easy. And we're also going to ask everyone on the chat to participate if they have an idea. So the first question, and we're going to start with Sarah, is, let's say you're designing a poster for a big national campaign against misogyny. What's the tagline? And anyone on the chat, if you have an idea for a tagline.
Mine is love like a man.
Love like a man. Okay, love like a man. Candidate number one, Lisa.
I'm going to go with flag it, because I still think we've got to get a better understanding of what's going on, and I need some data to find out what's going on, and that links with our complaint. So flag it.
Crikey, mine's much more mundane. I should have really thought out the box more. I've gone for make respect your curriculum.
And interesting, I would say, different levels of marketing savvy in there. And I have a follow-up question for you, Lisa, based on flag it. So we had a comment from Shireen Harry. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Well, when you flag it, what action is taken? Actually, does the perpetrator get support, guidance, punishment? Is there any consequence? What happens when things are done right currently? And maybe Sarah and David, you have opinions on that as well.
Yes, so it's really important that that it is addressed, because that's what our learners want. They want us to address this. They want us to do something and make a stand. So we will. It's also really important, if you just had a report, you've got to be careful that that's not a vexatious report, and that it is genuine. So you've got to handle it quite sensitively. If we do find out that there is a clear perpetrator of this harassment or whatever, then support is given for them as well as for the victim. So that will. It depends. We very much deal with that on a one-to-one basis. On it, we have person-centered practice here in the college, so we do work with that young person in a way that they get the information across without feeling defensive, so they're not going to take any of it in. The other thing that we're developing as a country is some modules that are going to be used, that are online modules, where if you have a young person who maybe they've harassed somebody's had a word, somebody's given them the support, somebody's given the education about when it's all right, and it's happening again, then there's going to be these online modules that they have to go through, and then that ends with a one-to-one. It sounds a little bit like what David is doing with his training, that sort of thing. So there's that as well that we're providing.
Great. And Sarah, I'm curious, how would that work in the US, or at least at your institution?
I would love that level of accountability. Right now, I feel like I'm out here in the rodeo just doing it alone. In the most recent incident that I had a student who was being very threatening. And while I reported it, I also made sure that the rest of the class knew what was going on. I was very transparent and said, this is the reason that your classroom is moving. We've had a male student who's made a threat, which everyone had witnessed anyway. And I think by calling it out in front of everyone and letting them know that I was handling it, not only was I building trust with my students and safety, they were able to see that a woman was not going to stand for this and that I was going to take it as far as I could in order to ensure my safety and theirs.
Great. So now, because it's a lightning round and we can have fun, imagine you're the dean for a day and you just found a pot of money somewhere, a lot of money, and there's something you can change tomorrow at your institution. What would be the one thing you would do? You have all the money you want. Who wants to go first?
Well, it's easy for me. I'd say to get the equipment to create VR scenarios and buy a load of VR headsets, because you can incorporate games, learning, as well as this kind of appropriate messaging and healthy relationship kind of commentary within everything. So that's my simple answer to everything.
Right. Lisa, Sarah, do you have a program there?
You go, Sarah. Sarah, sorry.
It's okay. I was going to say, just give it to all the faculty so they can get the hell out. Until education, do a mass exodus. Let everybody know we're not dealing with this anymore in the United States. And maybe if we start giving the faculty all this money, they'll just say goodbye. And then what are you going to do then? So yeah, I would give it to all the faculty so they could just leave and go do something else and teach out in the world in a new way.
Okay. Escapism, Lisa?
I'm going for buying people on the ground, making connections, which is similar to what David said earlier on about how we'd have a Bobby on a police officer or a PCSO on there in each college. I would have people making connections, encouraging other people to make connections, and being there to support if needed, and being role models and all that jazz.
So I think there's something on the resources. Both, I guess there's both the tech side and the human side, and you probably didn't need both for maximum impact. Now, a question that's probably more realistic for people who are here right now, which is you're a teacher and you have no money at all and very little support. What's one thing you can do starting tomorrow?
I think find out, talk to the young people, find out what their experiences are, and find out what the problem is. Because until you find out what their experiences are, you don't know what you should do.
Yeah, I would, and it depends on the age and maturity of the students we're talking about. But I would encourage every student to have a voice, own their voice, and to stand up for whatever they believe in, and to not to tolerate disrespect, to be strong enough to know that the staff of the college would support them if they were to stand up for a problem that had happened.
That sounds.
Yeah,
go ahead, Sarah, please.
I was gonna say I'll be contrarian. Quit. Please just go and get another job that pays better, because you do not get paid enough to deal with what you're dealing with in the United States and the education system. So please go quit. And then if you are passionate about education, go find another way to educate in a way that makes you more money and has more impact.
I think we're going to need another webinar, Sarah, to go through the entire program for the future of education. Last one on the lightning round, and then I'll start to take question from the chat for the last few minutes. That's the most difficult one, also the fun one. Who should be? We talk about models, and the positive men. Who should be the poster face of healthy behavior and masculinity? And by the way, I call dibs on Stephen Graham, so you cannot say Stephen Graham. But in the chat, who are the role models, the actual living men that we should put forward? We have Gareth Southgate on the chat, so that's taken already. Who can you think of?
I'd go for Matt Brown, the co-creator of She Is Not Your Rehab.
My first thought actually was I was going to say James Bond, but actually he's a bit of a misogynist, James Bond, and so he's not the best. So then I thought of Spider-Man. Is it Tom Holland, who's one of the British Spider-Mans? I'd have gone for him.
I was going to say my son. My son is it. Truly.
Love
Proud
that.
of my son.
That's beautiful. Great. Well, thanks a lot for that. We have a lot on the chat as well. You can read a lot of football players, which completely makes sense. So a few questions we've had on the chat. The first one is, how do you raise awareness, bring the problem out of the hush hush, we don't talk about it, which only attracts young kids, but without glamorizing the bad elements, who often are the more vocal, the more at ease, and so on. How do you thread that fine line? Any ideas?
I think critical thinking and calling things for what they are. It would be a starting point.
How do you teach critical thinking?
Yeah, that's really tricky. But I haven't got enough time to go into that now, but there are some tools out there that that you can, really simple tools that you can use in the classroom that will begin that critical thinking.
Okay, well, please do share those with us, and when we'll send the recording to everyone, we'll share the tools as well.
Yeah, I will do.
And Sarah or David, any opinion on how to thread that line between censorship and self-censorship and platforming, I guess?
I think flooding as many realistic, positive men into the lives of these young people as possible, particularly if you know creatives in the community, entrepreneurs. There are so many male figures in the just local community who are willing to come and make a visit and do a talk, or even just talk intimately in circles. So the more you can get, and also at least with writing, we do some writing prompts that are not necessarily about the assignment, but the goal is low stakes and to explore yourself through the journal prompts and build your creative spirit. And we know that in both men and women, when you build their creative spirit, you build their confidence, and it kind of does this beautiful like inner child thing. So they're playful again, and they get to remember who they are at their essence.
I would second what Lisa has said about the critical thinking. And I mean, it's not just children, it's adults that need to be taught critical thinking skills. I teach police officers who are serving police officers, and yet they get their news from TikTok and Instagram. So you talk to them, tell me about a positive story from the police in the last week, and they can't tell you, because unfortunately Instagram and TikTok are just full of bad stories about the police. So that's another challenge. How do the police make themselves look more positive in social media? Because policing is not very good at engaging with the public using social media. And
thanks. That's great. And I think the echo chamber of social media and the way the algorithm has been built it's very hard to feel like it's very hard to fight against. And again, we could have an entire webinar on the evolution of the algorithm. And Nick Clegg yesterday gave an interview where he talked about how the tech world in Silicon Valley had veered to the right, not for cultural reasons, but just because that's where the money is in terms of the algorithm. But you said, Sarah, love like a man. That was your tagline, which is great, but goes very much against the manosphere, which is there's no such thing as love. It's all a game, and it's all conquest. And so how do you encourage? How do you, I don't like the word teach, but how do you empower young men with emotional intelligence, which is not something that was ever taught in the classroom? It's not taught at home really anymore, and it's certainly not on social media. Any practical things besides using the Bodyswaps platform, glasses on, and anything you can do?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, right, we all know that being in the presence of a loving man who is vulnerable, tender, soft, that makes you feel safer than any other man who's out here screaming expletives or making all this money. In fact, if you're doing all of those things, that makes me feel like you're insecure, like you have something going on that I should not feel protected by you. So when a man is very assured and loving, so the way we do that is we bring it, again, you can bring it into the classroom, because we know that in families, like uncles and extended family used to kind of do that. And we kind of don't have that anymore. So as much as you can infuse community members of male figures who are in fact loving and unabashedly loving and tender in all of the ways with their family and their friends and with their work, I think the better.
Great. I realize we only have 3 minutes left. So is there anything, David, Sarah, Lisa, that you haven't said, or famous last words that you want to give to the audience? And if not, I'll summarize what I've heard today. Okay, I'll try to summarize without AI, so I'm not used to do that anymore, unfortunately. I think a few things that we've heard is, we talked very little about, and it's good, about the punishment element. It's not about being more coercive. It's not about not tolerating the behaviors. We also talked in realistic terms around the fact that the algorithms are what they are, the mechanics of capitalism are what they are, the political landscape is what it is, and what we want to focus is on practical solutions. And when it comes to practical solutions, we're talking not only about the pupils or students themselves, but also about the adults around them. There are some role models, famous role models that we can bring forward, but truly everyone should be a role model. The men should be role models in the way they behave. The women as well, in the way they call the behavior when it's safe to do so. We also discuss the possibility of bringing technologies like AI and VR to create some engagement, to create a safe space, but that in and of itself, as a standalone, is not a solution. And then at the end of the day, it is not about teaching what's right and wrong, but really showing it by bringing people together, creating that sense of belonging, and recreating that link, recreating that interaction that fundamentally misogyny will die, because it will be replaced implicitly by something that's just much greater and more enjoyable for everyone involved. So I want to thank you all for your time today. And I want to thank everyone on the chat who's been participating so much. We will send the video recording, we'll send some resources, and I wish you all a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.